I want to welcome you to this evening's webinar, and you can continue to uh, indicate in the chat button where you're logging in from. I would love to see that. But also, if you're new to our webinar platform, there's a Q&A button as well at the bottom of your screen that as we're going through the material this evening, if you've got a question to ask, would love for you to hit the Q&A button, ask your question right when you think of it, and I'll have an opportunity with the Q over on the side of my screen to be able to try and answer that either right when you ask it or between sections or even after the fact if we run out of time. So would love for you to um, ask a question, not in the chat button, in the chat box, but in the Q&A box. But I want to welcome you to this evening's webinar about 7 proven ways to really level up your guest experience at your church. And so at Waypoint, we have this webinar series for the last 6+ years, where we're trying to equip leaders in the church to really excel in their area of ministry, to thrive in their particular area. And so that would include areas like your prayer team or your safety and security team or your worship team, children's, youth, elders, deacons. And so we have a YouTube channel that you could visit after the fact. Would love for you to do that and see the other kind of webinars that we have, and they're organized by playlist. But you are our best advertisement for the other webinars that may not be the area of ministry that you particularly serve in, but there are friends at your church that could be better equipped in their area of ministry by getting to enjoy some of those webinars as well. And so I want to thank you in advance for number one on the YouTube channel, hitting subscribe and like, which helps those come up in your feed, and you'll get if you subscribe, there'll be a little notification on your YouTube interface that our newest video has been posted to our channel so that you can see that. And so I want to, first of all, thank Mid-Atlantic Christian University for being our longtime sponsor of our webinar platform since we began it. And they serve in the same ministry area that we do, the same churches and leaders. And so we're thankful that they are our sponsor for this webinar channel. I referred to our YouTube channel, and this is an older picture because it's got, well, number one, I look younger in that one picture, but number two, we are about 450 subscribers now, so we're looking to get past 500 subscribers to our YouTube channel, and so we are really thankful that there's a growing number of people in our region, leaders in the churches, that are being equipped by some of the topics that we are covering. Next month, for example, we will be talking about successful succession. I have to be careful as I say that, but we've got a panel of recent leaders who have passed the baton on after long ministries at their church, and some of the lessons they learned, both positive and negative, through that. And so I'm looking forward to that leading that panel next month. The following month, we've got one that's more soul care, that we provide 1 or 2 seminars per year that's about leaders in the church making sure they're taking care of themselves. And so Neil Wheeler, our director of leader care on our staff, is going to be leading a session called Finding Peace When God Says No to Our Prayers. And so those are the upcoming ones. And so you can check out all the different topics, the categories that are on our playlist, and find those and forward those to people in your church as well. And so, but tonight what we're talking about is 7 proven methods to level up, things that we see churches doing. And at Waypoint, as we serve churches and leaders in our region, we have the luxury of seeing lots of churches. Our staff would get to visit well over 120 churches a year around our region. So we don't get to all of them, but we see as many as we can. I'm home once a quarter, about 4 times a year, but I'm on the road to a different church, maybe your church, during the year. And so we get to see what churches are doing well, proven methods of what they're doing in a variety of areas. And but particularly about your guest experience, because we walk in often, obviously as a guest, but with the lenses on of what would this look like if I were a first-time visitor from your community. And so we get to see what different churches are trying to and succeeding at doing to warmly welcome their guests. And so we're going to talk about those 7 things tonight. And my goal tonight is, I'm not assuming that for those of you who are watching, whether it's in person or after the fact on our YouTube channel, not assuming that you have no idea of these 7 things. But that there's probably 3 or 4 that your church is already doing and probably doing well. There's probably 1 or 2 of these that are just not applicable to your situation at your church, that it just wouldn't work at your church. But hopefully there's 1 or 2 or 3 that you go, that would really help us level up, take our guest experience to the next level. And so that's what I want to share tonight is what we've seen in other churches around our region, churches doing that seem to have really helped as far as the guest experience, that their guests would do that. So let me share my screen here and go back to my slides. And so we want to talk about these areas. And so I'm going to start with the bottom and work our way up on this outline. We're going to level up one more at a time. And at the very end of the session, it really should have been 8, but at the end of the session is kind of the secret sauce, the one thing that trumps all of these things. And I want to talk about that last. That I think is, if you put all 7 together, it's more important than all 7 of these combined. So hopefully that's enough of a tease to keep you on during the whole session tonight. I didn't realize back in the day when we scheduled this session that it's Monday Night Football, and I'm came from Michigan. For those of you Buckeye fans that are watching, I've got my Michigan shirt on, but Detroit is playing in Monday Night Football, so I want to make this as quick as possible. So I want to share with you some of these things that we learned. But how can you level up? But before we get into that, let's talk about a couple things that kind of set up the idea of your guest experience, that helps you understand why we need to talk about this. And it's not an exhaustive conversation, but a couple things that come to mind for me almost immediately as I think about your guest experience in your church. And the first thing is, I think we need to appreciate the anxiety that your guests might be experiencing as they visit your church. And I think we forget as we go to church every Sunday, and we know the building, we know the people, we know kind of the order of service, we know the culture, that we forget what it's like when you walk into a building and you don't know any of those things. And so we will often at Waypoint do some training, some first impressions training, which we would love to talk about doing at your church Saturday morning, 2-3 hour experience with a group of key leaders at your church, not just 2 or 3 people, but bring together 20 or 30 people that are in all the different areas of your church, because all the areas of your church on Sunday morning have an element of guest services to it. It's as they're entering the parking lot, as they're entering the building, as they're entering the auditorium, as they're checking in their kids, all around the building, there are people that should have a view towards how are our guests moving around the building. And so we'll do this. And one of the exercises that we do in this first impressions training is to put on our imagination caps and think about, hey, what would it look like if we all got on a charter bus right now? And I'll even say, hey, I rented a charter bus, and here at lunchtime, we're all going to get on this charter bus, and we're going to go experience a worship service at the local Hindu temple. And so then I write on the whiteboard, so what questions would you have between now and when we get on the bus that you're starting to think of in your mind? And because I'm guessing that for most of us, we have never attended a Hindu worship service. And so we just kind of start listing the things that we're just not familiar with. And it's with that idea in mind that we think about the people that come to your church have so many unanswered questions as they're walking into the building, and they don't know the people. They don't know your people. They might have watched online, which is very likely in today's culture post-COVID. We had to get all churches up and running with streaming their worship service, and whether it's on your Facebook page or YouTube channel. But people now, studies have shown, have watched your worship service many times, multiple times before they visit in person, but they still haven't been in your building, and they still haven't seen the one thing that you see from streaming is pretty much you only see the stage. And so you don't know a lot about the people of your church by worshiping and visiting online. And so they're pulling into the parking lot, and there's a little anxiety about what's going to happen, because once they come on the parking lot, they're kind of in, right? I mean, they could turn around and drive back out. But once they get out of their car, Now they're committed and they got to walk into this church that is unfamiliar to them. And that's it's kind of like going to your first day of school, first grade, and you walk into the classroom and there's all these kids that you don't know and this room that you don't know. And if you can think about what that was like for you back in the day, it would be very similar. So to appreciate the anxiety your guests might be experiencing, and what we're trying to do is lower all the hurdles of these things that they have to mentally jump over to feel comfortable in your service. And so to put their lenses on as they walk through your doors or even onto your property and think about that. So the other thing I'd like to bring up before we get into these 7 things is that, and I've talked about this on other um, webinars related to this. And if you go to our YouTube page and look at our playlist for first impressions, I think there's 8 or 9 previous webinars on this topic that we would love for you to look at as well. But one thing is to understand the biblical meaning of the word hospitality. And it's one of those words that we see in Scripture used in a variety of ways, but the most notable way is in the description of what elders the qualifications of elders in both 1 Timothy 3 and in Titus chapter 1. Here's the one from Titus where it says, instead, they, which are elder candidates, must be friendly to strangers and enjoy doing good things, be sensible, fair, pure, and self-control. That doesn't sound familiar because I grew up King James Version in the old days. But the word in the King James versions and older translations will say they must be hospitable or show hospitality, and where it says be friendly to strangers. And I like this translation a lot better because it gets really close to what the actual word is in the Greek that the Apostle Paul was using. And that is this word philoxenos, that the leader must have and practice philoxenos, which is the love of strangers. Philo is like Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, or phileo, love, brotherly love, and so that's the love of. And then xenos is a stranger or an alien, and there's a multiple applications to that. But in this context, it's about people who don't belong to your church. The sign of a mature believer, because you got to think this isn't just elders that need to love outsiders. Is another thing I would say. It's in the qualifications for an elder, but what the Apostle Paul is telling both Timothy and Titus in these 2 passages is, I planted these churches. I left these churches to move on to other places, and now you, as the preachers of these churches, you need to select your first class of elders. And so let me tell you the kind of leaders you need to choose them. And so he described what a mature, godly leader looks like, from whom the elders would be chosen. And so I don't believe that this list is exclusive to elders. It's a composite of what a godly leader looks like, from whom elders are chosen. So any godly leader in the church needs to have a love of outsiders. And so that changes your idea of what hospitality means. And of course, that may mean that you welcome people into your home that don't belong so that they really feel like they belong. But there's a lot of more application because it's about the heart of, there are people here that don't belong that need to feel like they do belong. And that's what a mature believer, the lenses they have on at church. So it's with that thought in mind, I want to talk about 7 methods that churches are using that change their experience for their guests. And so the first thing I want to get into, and again, there's a Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. And so if you have a question, go ahead and hit that, and we can try and answer that question whenever it would fit in. But the first thing I want to talk about is something that I learned from a friend of mine, Jerry Harris, at a conference, I don't know, less than 10 years ago, 6, 7 years ago. And he talked about the dot at their churches. And the dot, he explained, is the average age of the adult or the people in your adult worship room. And it's on a timeline from 0 to 80 or 100 years old, however you want to do that. But if you were to poll everybody, and you can actually do this, and at Jerry's churches there in the Midwest, they calculate their dot every year on the same week of the year in all of their, they've got a multi-site church, but they look at all of their campuses, all of their services, and they want to know what their what their dot is, which is the average age. And that, because that helps you understand where your church is relative to years prior. If you don't measure this, you'll never know. And Jerry said at their churches there in the Midwest that their sweet spot was about 43 as their target. And a lot of churches that we work with, another consulting program, Waypoint, some of the deliverables that we provide for churches are training, coaching, consulting, connecting, and care. And one of the consulting things that we do is we come in and try and help you create a plan for really moving forward when you feel like you're stuck. And the first exercise that we'll do is calculate your dot. And for a lot of churches, the number is somewhere around 50, that the average age is 50. And Jerry says that 43 is the sweet spot, but it's a real trick, because once your dot gets past 43 or 44, at least in their community, and that can shift upward or downward, what happens is the average person in your church is leaning towards becoming an empty nester. And you're beginning the phase towards aging out, and where all your decisions are made by people who no longer have kids in their home. And what happens at your church is that even when you continue to do church really well, all things considered, a year from now, your dot is going to move one to the right, if that makes any sense. And 3 years from now, it's going to be, and you're getting further and further away from that kind of sweet spot of when your average age is parents of teenagers. And it's tricky, because what happens is you've got just a few years to watch your dot before you go from that yellow square to that red dot here on this. Because what will happen is when your dot is in that yellow zone right there, your church is at their best. You're sending the most kids to CIY in the summer and to church camp, and your youth group is the largest it's ever been. And 5 years from after that, if you're not very aware of what you're doing to keep that dot moving to the left rather than to the right, all of a sudden your church is in that age-old scenario of, we're starting to get older and we don't know what to do about that. And so what I say for that about proven methods for churches is, and I'd love to talk a whole lot more about the dot and how you can work to push the dot to the right, because you've got to work doubly hard, because it will naturally go, or push it to the left because it just naturally moves to the right. But when you understand your dot, then what churches do is they consider that as they think about their guest services, is what's the dot of your volunteers in your guest services area. And so to physically figure out, and this might seem crazy, but to say, hey, on our team of 4 people today, our average age for the people, because you're making a statement to the people who are walking up into in towards your building and into your lobby by the people they are first greeted by. And I visited a church 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was one of our new churches, but it was a practice service. And it just happened to be for the practice service that their average age outside was significantly different than the actual average age of what was inside. And so I talked to our church planter about that, and they were going to address that after they open. It just happened to be, but it's with a view towards we're making a first impression as people are walking up to the building. And so you can make a decision on what you want. You could have all older folks out there, because that's consistent who's in your church, or you could have a mix, or you could front load it with people that are younger. I think it's always great to have kids out there passing out the bulletin or saying hello or whatever, because that makes a statement. But the first thing to do is to think about who are we, and when we put our teams together, about who is going to be in the volunteer rotation. Are we thinking about the collection of that team as far as the picture of the cross section of the church that we'd like to let our guests know, oh, there are people here my age at this church. And so you kind of have to kind of have a mix of who's there. The same would be true about thinking about who's on stage on Sunday morning as they come and sit down, and the band comes up. Is everybody in the band older? Is everybody in the band under 25? Is there a mix? And not that any of those are right or wrong, but it's making a statement to your guests about kind of the cross section of your church visually of what they're seeing when the first song begins playing. I was meeting with the church last year, and we calculated their dot, and we figured out it was just under 50. And then we discovered, when I talked about what about your band, the worship leader was 49, and he was the youngest guy on stage. And they were trying to figure out how can we get younger as a church. And so one of my recommendations was to think about maybe having some younger people on stage as well. And so understand your dot and then program accordingly as far as thinking about how you mix up your teams who volunteer in your particular areas. So if you got a question about that, please hit your Q&A button. I don't know if that dot makes a whole lot of sense, but where your average age, where is it, does it fit on that timeline of age of people in your church? I would also say that this also applies to your communion and offering volunteers. And in this day and age, that's changed a little bit since COVID, that we're not necessarily passing out communion, though I'm seeing that more and more every week. The church that I attended yesterday passed out communion, even though they had both the kind that you open up that we started doing during COVID, and then they had the double stack one as well, but they passed them out. But when those people are in play, I would also think about what are the ages of people that are passing out communion and or offering, because you're making a statement of there's a variety of people around at this church. When I was leading in a local church, I instructed the people that recruited those people in our worship service that I wanted to see a variety of ages. I wanted to see men and women, teenagers. And we had a fairly healthy ethnic mix in our church, and I wanted that to be represented in who volunteered each week, each service as well. And because people that were guests, they see the people standing up passing out communion, and it makes a statement to them. Oh, they let ladies, do things here at this church compared to the church that I grew up in, or they allow kids to be involved in the worship service. Versus the church that I may have gone to, or my expectations of what churches would do. And so you make a statement by understanding your dot and then programming your volunteering as a result. All right, that's number one. And that's probably longer than I need to go on that. Some of these are quicker than that one. The next one I would say is make sure you cast vision with your pre-service slides. All right, and here's what I mean by that is I get to go to a different church every Sunday, and the pre-service slides are usually fairly well done, but a lot of them are kind of a little bit stale. They've been used for quite a long time. A lot of them are a lot of text, and they're kind of like the bulletin put into slides, and they're announcing the trunk or treat service that's coming up here at the end of October, and just a lot of text. But if we're honest with each other, who is sitting in the chairs the 10 minutes before church? Not a lot of members. And so you can have those things, but I would have filtered into your pre-service slides vision casting about the church, and have some slides and I would have images of smiling people from your church. I would also use a photographer from your church, if not a professional photographer, but think about how quality are the images for these slides, because there's two kind of visitors. There's some that are late because they don't, they're not used to coming there, and they don't get seated. But usually it's your members who are out in the lobby talking too long, and they come in for the first song or second song. But a lot of your visitors arrive on time because they don't know how long it's going to take to be seated, and they're actually seated before the church service gets started. So use that opportunity to cast vision about this is the kind of church we are, and they're smiling people and hugging people, and not just in Sunday morning, but here was this outreach event we did in September, and here's all these smiling people from our church that were doing that. And that can make them feel like, oh, there's normal people here. And they didn't get to see those slides necessarily when they watched your stream. If they didn't log on before, you may show those slides at the beginning of your stream, which I think is helpful, or could be. But they get to sit there and continue to get a feel for what your church is like. And it doesn't have to be the whole slide deck, but I would intersperse those every other one with members versus visitors in mind as the slides go through there. The other thing I would say about that is you can vision cast with your walls in your building as well. And by what I mean by that, I meant to have images of this and I don't, so I apologize. But if you've got a discipleship pathway that you've worked on that said this is kind of the way you work through our discipleship pathway, is get a graphic made and put that on a prominent wall in your lobby rather than just like no thought about what's on the wall or kind of random Christian stuff from the Christian bookstore, but show people visually this is what our church is about. And think about how you can use your space to cast vision. I like to see. I don't see many women's bathrooms, but in men's bathrooms, I like to see the ones where they've thought about. We've got walls in here where we can create an image about what our church is about, even by the walls in the bathroom, rather than them just being white walls or nothing done with them. All right, so that's number two. Let me go back to our slides here. And again, if you've got a question about any of these, please hit the Q&A button. I'll try and get your questions answered. Number three, one thing that I really love seeing is how churches are thinking very creatively about collecting their Connect cards. And so your guests are hesitant to give out the information. It used to be when I was growing up, if we visited a church, my mom had no concerns about the church and how they would use the information, and she would fill out those cards as we visited and give all kinds of information. But now people are very hesitant to give information. So number one, it will sound awkward to say this week after week, but it does not go without saying to tell your guests, we're not going to give your information away to anybody outside of our church. And some sentence like that they can feel, okay, it's somewhat safe to give my information to this church. So that's number one. But you can use some creative methods, fun methods for them to feel like they're part of something, to fill out their Connect card, and they don't feel like they're the only ones that are going to be filling it out. Now, when we first started using Connect cards years ago, we would try and get all of our members to fill them out as well and kind of guilt them for not filling it out. But to be honest, if you're a member, why do they need my Connect card? And to register your attendance. Well, we don't register attendance anymore. And so it felt disingenuous to try and make guests feel like they weren't the only ones filling it out because we would make members fill it out. But you can find creative ways to do that. And so, for example, one of the ways I love to see best, some of our church plants are using this method, is that they are finding, for example, Collective Church in Frederick, Maryland. They use a local nonprofit, Christian-based nonprofit that they support out of their local giving, but their local outreach missions money. So not necessarily domestic, but you could choose for it to be anybody. But by quarter, they say, if you fill out a Connect card today, we're going to make a donation on your behalf for this ministry that we support at our church. And so for like the fourth quarter, it's buying hats and gloves for kids that need them during the wintertime. And what mom that's visiting your church, if they find out if you fill out this Connect card, we're going to donate $5 to buy gloves and hats for kids that need them in our community, they will fill out those Connect cards. And so they feel like, number one, there's a reason to fill that out other than just giving my information. And so I think that's brilliant. And then they'll say, hey, the last quarter we gave it to the Pregnancy Crisis Center, and we gave this amount of money because of all the people that filled out their Connect card. We donated that money on their behalf to that organization. And so we raised X amount of dollars. And so they feel like they're part of something other than just giving information. Another way that you can creatively do that, that I used personally, was around sporting events. That you don't need to do something creative every week necessarily, but there's weeks during the year that you can capitalize on and say, hey, Super Bowl is tonight, and the Buccaneers are playing their NFC, so they're playing Pittsburgh, and so even if you don't know football, if you put at the top of the Connect card today, fill out the card and put either the Buccaneers or the Steelers at the top of your card, we're going to give away fill in a blank to someone who picked the right team. And so when you do that, you might only get a few Connect cards normally from week to week, but you'll get a whole stack of people that put Steelers or Buccaneers on there, and they don't even have to know anything about football to do that. And so, or it could be, give me the number of the car that's going to win Daytona this week, which is the week after the Super Bowl, or who's going to win the World Series that's coming up here soon. Who knows who's going to be in it? And so, and you can say, hey, the two teams that are in it are, the Dodgers and the Yankees. And so, who do you think's going to win? Even if you don't know baseball, we're going to give away this at the end. And so people will fill that out, and but they'll fill out their Connect card as well. And so we had someone hit a Q&A button right there. Thanks for the question. I would do the challenge with that. Someone asked, do we only do that with visitors? No, I would do that with everybody in the church. But visitors will fill that Connect card out as well, because they got just as good a shot of anybody if they pick, the Steelers to win the Super Bowl on their card. Even though they're first time visitors, they got a shot at it. One year we gave away something at our church, but it was leading up to Easter, and then at Easter we were going to give away something big. But you could, for like 6 weeks, you could fill out a card, and each time you filled it out, you were in the drawing. And we gave away something, and it turned out that there was a fellow that was a first time visitor on Easter, so we only had one card rather than six, and we drew it out, and we gave him a big deal. And he started coming. He had come on Easter with his adult daughter, but then he started regularly attending our church as well. He was just her wingman to bring her to church for the first time. And so find some creative way other than just kind of badgering people for their Connect cards, because they're pretty hesitant to give you their information in this day and age. But if there's a way to make it fun and make it feel like they're part of something, then you got a better shot of collecting those cards. So I'm going to share and go back to the next thing here. All right. Someone asked, why are Connect cards so important? That's a great question. Because we're trying to get our guests to self-identify as, hey, I'm interested in connecting here. And it doesn't have to be a Connect card. Some churches will use a method where we say, hey, we've got this area over off to the side of the service, and if you're new, after the church, we'd like to connect with you for 5 minutes. One church just calls it 5 minutes more. And I've seen other phrases for that. But to get someone from being a guest to a regular attender, there's got to be some connection made. And so you'd like to be able to email them once you have their Connect card saying, hey, thanks for coming. Here's the way that you can discover our church. We've got a discover our church party at the first Sunday of the month coming up, and we'd like to invite you to that. But those connections to be able to make where you're pushing them information about things that they could consider coming to. The other thing that's really interesting there is for Connect cards is they can indicate where they are spiritually as a result of that. That should be a section on your Connect card. For those of you your church has already give to Waypoint, you helped us start a church 4 Sundays ago in Charlestown, West Virginia, Anthology Christian Church, Anthology Church, and they had 178 on opening day. And the church planner discovered on the day before opening that there was a spelling mistake on his Connect card that he had printed. And it was going to drive him bananas. But thankfully, he decided to make a game out of it. So on opening day, he said, hey, we said we're a church for no perfect people allowed, and we're going to prove that. There's a spelling mistake on our Connect card. If you can fill out the card and circle the spelling mistake, we're going to give away something, next week. And so they did that, got a monstrous stack of cards. But the interesting thing is, one of the things on there is, I'd be interested in talking to someone about becoming a member of this church. I'd be interested in talking with someone about what it means to get baptized. And he had 13 people indicate on the Connect card that they'd be interested in talking to someone about what it means to get baptized. And so it becomes a very easy way for people to indicate where they are in their spiritual questioning if you give them the options to kind of say, so these are the kind of questions I'm facing in, early on in my spiritual journey, or I'd like to get plugged in, or whatever. So that's a great question. All right. The next one here is to give gifts to returning guests. This is kind of a new idea that I've just seen recently, but there's lots of churches that over the past 20 years have some kind of gift bag for first-time guests, which is great. But the idea about this is to encourage people to return. The best way to grow your church is not first-time guests, is to grow the number of second-time guests that you have. because you'll get people that'll come and think this church isn't for me. I'm not connected, or they're not my kind of people. It's not my kind of worship. It's not my kind of fill in the blank. Um, but a person that comes back a second time is saying a powerful statement by their returning that this is the kind of church I'm really trying to see if I could become a regular attender or even a member at. And so you can kind of hint at that by saying, "Hey, if you're a returning guest, if you're a second time guest this this week, we've got a special." So for one church, they give away nicer shirts than your $2 t-shirts, but a nicer shirt, and say, "This is going to be the nice t-shirt you've got," and they, it's generally a nice shirt, but they don't give away that to first time guests. They say, "Hey, if you're a returning guest, we've got if you go to the information table, the Get Connected table, we've got a shirt to give you." And when they come and get that shirt, number one, you won't give away as many as the first time guests. There are people that a lot of churches used to give away kind of nice $10 mugs. People visit one time and never come back. You've given away a $10 mug. Now your logo's on it. Maybe they'll think about returning. But that person that is at the booth where they are giving away the t-shirts or the whatever nicer gift is, or I've seen churches give away gift cards to Starbucks for $10 or whatever, is then they say, "Oh, we're so glad you're back," and they can begin a conversation with that person because they've self-identified as a returning guest. And so thinking about the assimilation process, again, in our assimilation training, we talk about there's a difference between a first-time guest and a second-time guest and a third-time guest. They are asking different questions in their mind. First-time guests are asking all those questions like they're going to the Buddhist or Hindu worship service. How long is the service? What are they going to do with my kids? What's the dress code? Is the preacher any good? All those things. They've got all these questions in their mind that they're going to have answered their first time. When they return the second time, all of those questions were answered the first time. So the question the second time around is, can I get plugged in here? Are there people I can make friends with here? And so thinking about what are the questions in the mind of a second time guest, a returning guest, that you can kind of try and address for them by them identifying themselves. Now, one thing a lot of our churches do in the region is that they will say, "Hey, at our church, we're glad you're here if this is your first time, but we would love for you to try 5." And so they've got a slide that with try 5. We'd like for you to try. You can't figure out a church in one Sunday, but you can really get to know a church if you visit a few times. And so we want to invite you to try our church and if this after 5 weeks, if this church is not the church for you, we've got relationships with other churches in the region and we in the area, and we'd love to get you plugged into some church here in town. And so people will identify on their card, "This is my first time, this is my second time." If if you meet them in the lobby, they'll say, "This is my third time," because you've every week talked about, "Hey, we'd love for you to come 5 times before you decide if this is the church for you." And that makes a whole lot more sense in this day and age, because they've already visited online multiple times. So by the time they visit in person, they're really trying to tell you, "I'm really thinking about making this church my home church." It used to be that before COVID and before streaming, that a first time guest on your property was different than a first time guest now. But a returning guest is telling you a ton that they're ready to be reeled in and welcomed into the church family by their return. And so figuring out a way to approach that. And what you discover from those churches that use the try 5 method, they announce it. "We'd love for you to try it 5 times," and you can give different gifts for a second time guest or a third time guest. And by saying, "If you're a third time guest, then we'd like to give this to you," and it kind of increases, is it's telling people, "Hey, I want to come back. I want to keep coming back because there's more for me to experience every time I come back." So if you got questions about that, let me know. But I'm going to move on for time's sake. This is the Waypoint 55, and we try and deal with the ministry related topic in 55 minutes or less. And so the or less is what I'm trying to focus on. All right. Number 5, clarify your communion instructions. And I checked back this before this seminar. At least one of the other webinars that I've done on this topic, I dealt with this as well. So I want to welcome you to look at some of the other ones. I did one about 8 months ago about secret shoppers. But one thing that we see in churches, And it goes back to is that the instructions about communion are not clear enough for your guests. So let's think about that for a second. Um, and Because your guests, number one, have never taken, if they're a first time guest, they've never taken communion at your church. But not only that, think about that preceding thought that we had at the beginning, which is all the anxiety they have not having been at your church in the past. And most people that will attend your church are not from a church that takes communion every Sunday. So it's not a normal thing for them to do at church in the first place. Either they're unchurched and they don't know anything about communion, or they went to a church whose faith tradition takes communion once a month, once a quarter, once kind of at random as it kind of fits into their ministry calendar, or they take it in a different way. Like if it's a Catholic church, they actually do take it every week, but sometimes you go forward to the altar and they put the wafer on your tongue. I don't know what they do post COVID with all that. But or take it by intinction where you walk up in the Methodist church and they hand it to you and you dip it in. So communion is completely different for most of your guests than our frame of reference. For those of us in the Christian church who take communion every Sunday, passed around in a communion tray where you get the little thing, or maybe now you get that on your way in, it's a completely different deal, and we forget their perspective. And I visit a different church every Sunday, and I've been part of the Christian church my whole life, but because I'm a first time guest, I have no idea how you're going to take it at your church. And so I'm not stressed out about it, but that moment when you start talking about communion, there's a little bit of thought in my mind where I'm starting to think about, I'm looking around thinking how do they take this communion at this church? Do we all take it together? Do we take it as it's passed? Um, Back in the old days, we would take communion and put it back in immediately. I'm usually seated more towards the front. And so I'm going to be looking over my shoulder as it's passed to me. If I'm sitting in the front row, I'm toast because I got to take it first. But what you can do at this case is to have very clear communion instructions about, hey, at our church, this is how we take communion. Or this Sunday, if it's different than your norm, we're going to hold the elements and then take them all together when instructed, and have a slide up there. But here's the trick to this is your instructions have to be put up earlier than you think. And here's why. As soon as you start talking about communion, all of these thoughts are going through the mind of your guests because they don't know how you take communion there. And so whoever's talking about communion, whether it's someone giving a communion thought, communion meditation, or if the preacher is segueing out of his sermon towards communion, as a lot of churches do these days, they're they're only hearing half of what's being said because they're thinking about how do they take communion here. And so if you can put a slide up as communion begins to be talked about that says, hey, here at our church, this is what's going to happen with communion, they'll read that in about 2 seconds while they're still listening to the communion thought. And then all of their concerns and anxiety is going to be allayed, and then they'll listen to the rest of the communion thought without any of that anxiety. What normally happens is that they talk about it, kind of passed out, and then the slide comes up, and by then it's too late because it's already been passed out. And at least, and another thing is to in your instructions give instructions about what to do with the cups, the used cups, because in some churches there's a little place on the chair in front of you. We don't, a lot of churches anymore that don't have pews that have the obvious places to put the cups. Or are they going to pass out a little basket later to put them in? Or are we supposed to dispose of them ourselves on the way out? And a person that's visiting your church has no idea what to do. So you can say all that, but I would say it earlier than later. So someone asked, Charles asked, what concise statement can we put on the screen for communion that won't be distracting? Um, Here's what I would say about that, Charles. Thanks for asking that question. Is there's no way to say it without being distracting. But what I'll tell you is when it's up there every week, your regular attenders and all your members aren't going to read that slide anyway, and so it's not distracting because they know that that slide is for guests. And so they don't even look at that slide. They just pay attention to the person talking about communion. But for your guests, they're thinking about what in the world's going on in the next 3, 4, 5 minutes. And I don't know. And so there's anxiety there. And so you can level up your guest experience by thinking through the lenses of a first time guest having no idea how communion is done here. And you can change the background imagery for that all you want, but the text can be the same, saying, communion is a time to remember Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. At our church, we hold the elements and then take them together as instructed. There's a quote for you that I might try to wordsmith. Or at our church, this is what we do. We take the elements as passed, and then dispose of the cups on your way out after the service, or something like that. It doesn't have to be huge, but it's a slide that says, here's what we do. But the secret sauce to that is to get it up early. Because as soon as you start talking about communion, I can tell you, I visit a church every Sunday and I'm thinking, okay, how are we going to do communion today? And I know they're thinking it, because communion is even less normal for someone who didn't grow up in our faith tradition. All right. Thanks for the question there. All right. 2 more to go. All right. Leveling up. And then secret sauce. I got to get the secret sauce. Number 6 is to recruit and deploy what I would call zone greeters. And zone greeters are people that are not in the official greeter spot, but they have a zone in the auditorium that is their normal zone. You've got people in your church that kind of sit in the same spot every Sunday, and they may not volunteer to be greeters out in front, which we love to have greeters. We instruct churches in our training to have someone that literally stands with the door open, the door to their back, where you're literally physically saying, hey, our door is open for you today. And that's a powerful statement. But you've got these people in this rotation, but those people, you can tell, just like going into Walmart or into Moe's, when they say, welcome to Moe's, it's like they're supposed to say that, right? But then if you go and sit down at Moe's and someone at the table next to you strikes up a conversation with you, you don't think that they're being paid to have that conversation. And the same is true in church, is churches have gotten very good in this day and age with thinking about first impressions, about the impressions they make from the curb to the parking lot, into the auditorium, or into the building, into the auditorium, and back out again. But I can tell you, at churches, um, when I walk in there, I can tell this is what those people were assigned to do. But then when I have a conversation with someone in a zone greeter, so a zone greeter, you can go up to a person, and I've told this story before, but there was a fella at our church in Richmond. His name was Tiny Richmond. He was 6'6" and 300 plus, and big dude named Tiny. But Tiny always had a big gulp. He came to church with a big gulp or some giant drink, but he always sat right over on my left, over here, kind of back of the middle area there. So I asked Tiny, "Hey, Tiny, would you notice anybody new sitting in your area? And he was always there a couple minutes early. Would you warmly welcome them?" And he's like, "Sure." And Tiny probably would have never volunteered to be on our greeting team, but a real person that had a view towards a lover of strangers, philoxenos, he was all in for our church, and so he was that. Another person was on our tech team, uh, uh, Brennan. But after our tech team was done, and we tried to get our tech team done at 20 minutes before the church service, I would watch her literally turn around and see if there were any new people seated behind her, because our tech team was in the middle of the auditorium. And so then she would go talk to that person for those 15 minutes or 10 minutes before church, because she had that philoxenos, that she would say, "Hey, my name's Brennan. I'm working the tech team here. I've been at the church so long," or whatever. And she was obviously not a greeter out in the lobby. She was just a zone greeter, unofficial in her area of the auditorium. Somebody asked a question there, but I got that idea originally. I heard of that idea for the first time. Um, and So Madison asked a question here. I'll get to that in a second, Madison. Thanks for the question. But I married into the family that went to a very large church in the Midwest, and thousands and thousands of people. And my father-in-law was a deacon and then an elder at this church. And the auditorium was so large that 10, 15 minutes before church, there's just hundreds of people coming to the auditorium, and you couldn't hardly warmly welcome it all. And so all the leaders of the church were kind of deputized to be zone greeters in the area where they typically sat. And so, which is a great, and so my father-in-law thought that our section of this large auditorium was kind of his fishing pond. And he would go and kind of, the 5, 10 minutes before church, look for people that were kind of new to the church. and talk to them and have just a normal conversation rather than the person at the door that's saying not welcome to Moe's, but welcome to our church, and they're kind of officially supposed to say that. All right. So I think I can get your answer there, Madison, by going to the next one. You're right ahead of me. Let's see if I can share this last one, and then I want to get to the secret sauce. Oh, we're about out of time. So I would say get regular secret shopper reports. And Waypoint gets to do that multiple times at a church where we'll visit and with our secret shopper lenses on, take notes, prepare a report, and then come share that report with some key people at your church. But related to that, and there's a modest fee to have us come do that, but related to that is we also do a number of strategic services for churches to help them get on mission and stay on mission. And this idea of warmly welcoming your guests is a big, huge part of that. And so we would love to come in and train a group of your people on how do we have a culture of welcoming guests at our church. And it talks about like teaching your people this word philoxenos, that a mature believer loves people who don't belong to our church, and other methods. And so it's not just signing them up for an experience to stand in a spot 1 hour per whatever the rotation is, once a month or once a week or whatever it is, but understanding that we're welcoming people into not only our church, but in their experience, they're encountering Jesus today. This can become their church home with a spiritual family, all those kind of vision casting things that need to be done in some fairly regular training and equipping of people to be in this area. So let's get to the secret sauce because I think it deals with that. I think if this is your question, is how do you create a culture where a guest will have a real conversation with a real person? Because I think that's the secret sauce. I go to some really large churches that have first impressions system down like you'd never believe. Like it is a machine. And if I were grading them on their first impression system, I'd have to give them a 97 or a 98. But I also can go through that church with a great system, walk in, attend their worship service, walk out, and never have a real conversation with a real person. I might have 3 or 4 or 5 people that say, "Hey, how you doing?" or "Hey, welcome to our church." But the trick is to have a real conversation with the real person. And how can you create a culture where that is the case? And so my example of that, I just attended 2 Sundays ago, Cool Spring Christian Church in Lunenburg County. It's a little country church in South Central Virginia, 250 years old, their 250th birthday. They're older than America. And it's a thriving church out in the country. Dave Richmond is the preacher there. But the last time I visited there, after the church service, I got up out of my pew. It's an old church, 250-year-old church, and stood and just kind of watched the environment. And the people seated right behind me happened to be first-time guests. And the couple behind them, as soon as the church service was over, this lady tapped them on the shoulder and said, "Hello, my name is Debbie. Are you guys guests here?" And they said yes. And she said, "Oh, my name's Debbie. And this is my husband, Bill. And I'm a teacher at the elementary school. And my husband Bill, he works with the fire department. And we've been coming to this church for 9 years, and we love this church. And when we first came, the reason we came was for this. But now this is what we love about our church. And now tell me what your name is." And what I loved about this, man, I wish I could have recorded that. Is this was not a deacon that had been assigned to be at the back door. And this church, if I'm honest, if you look at like all the 12 stations that you could have in a first impressions deal, they didn't have any coffee. They have no lobby. You just walk right into the auditorium. No people out greeting in the parking lot. All those things that you might set up, they didn't have any of them. But what's the odds of this couple who were empty nesters that were looking for churches near where their grandkids live, that they might move into the area? What's the odds that they felt comfortable about giving this church another try because this lady, kind of a zone greeter, had a real conversation with them after church? And it's like, well, how can you replicate that culture in a church? And that's the big question, is that you've got to teach people that that's what our church is about. That it's philoxenos. We love people who don't belong to our church. And when those are the lenses on, I learned at a conference years ago to remind our worship team as we would gather and pray before the church service to say out loud, remember, every Sunday could be somebody's first Sunday. And so we would say that every Sunday among our people that were then going to go because we were done with our practice and they're going to go hang out. Is they're not just going to go get coffee or go to the restroom. Is they got the lenses on of today might be somebody's first Sunday. And with that thought in mind, it changes the whole culture of what's going to happen there. And I would teach people to use the phrase, "What brought you to our church to this Sunday?" Which that question is very carefully phrased. And we're out of time. And so I want to invite you to check out our last webinar 8 months ago on this topic that explains how to use those kind of questions really well to begin conversations with people that are visitors at your church. But these are the 7 things that we're seeing that churches in our region are doing that are helping their guests feel so much more at ease about thinking, you know what, I could make this my church home. This could be my church family. And so somebody's asking a question here. So thanks for your questions, number one. And and we would love to serve your church by coming and doing some training or equipping at your church. It's what we do. That we exist we envision an ever increasing number of thriving churches and leaders in our region. And so when you're thriving, we're winning. And so that's what we're about. And so if Waypoint can come alongside you to help you create this culture of warmly welcoming guests, philo xenos, into your church, and as a result, warmly welcoming people into the kingdom, we want to partner with you and come alongside you in doing that. All right, have a great evening. We hope to see you in one of our upcoming webinars, or if not you, the person at your church that needs to watch any of our upcoming webinars. So stay tuned to those promotions. Have a great night.
As soon as I stepped foot on MacU's campus, I learned that community was a big part of the university.
You're going to find yourself in a community of faith. You're going to find yourself in a community that loves you and accepts you.
It's a great opportunity to grow as a person.
I feel like MacU is equipping me to be able to defend my faith and help others no matter where I'm put in life.
My faith and religion is much stronger since being here.
We here have a purpose of trying to help you to become the person God's called you to be, to make a difference in the world as a leader. And while there's plenty of places that offer wonderful opportunities, having that focus, I really do think makes a difference.
The professors here, the students, we all want to see each other grow, and you're going to be loved, you're going to be welcomed, and they're always going to care for you.
The professors want to get to know you. You're not just a number.
Come take a tour, see what campus life is all about. I truly think that everyone who comes here is here for a reason.
There's so many opportunities for you. There's something for everybody.
You become part of something bigger than yourself when you come to Mid-Atlantic.
You see these students come in, some of which are very unsure of even why they're here, and they leave prepared to go do something great for the world.